the person who shaped my political consciousness was a white man. And here I ended up a Black Panther. And they may seem a contradiction in terms, but when you know the rest of my life, you do know that it all makes sense.
Former Black Panther Party chairwoman Elaine Brown. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. When Huey Newton and Bobby Seale co-founded the Black Panther Party in 1966, it was at that time a very male, very masculine-oriented organization. It didn't have its first female member for a year. And then in 1968, another young woman, a 25-year-old woman from Philadelphia, joined the party. Her name was Elaine Brown. And it was largely through her efforts over the next few years that the Black Panther Party became a more female-friendly kind of organization. And finally, in 1971, she succeeded Eldridge Cleaver as the party's information minister. And then in 1974, when Huey Newton fled to Cuba to avoid prosecution in the U.S., he appointed Elaine Brown the chairwoman, the head of the Black Panther Party. Now, it was largely through her efforts that then the party began to advance more female causes, but there was so much male-female rivalry going on, as well as other intra-party squabbles. By the time Huey Newton returned in 1977, Elaine Brown had had enough, and she left the party. The Black Panther Party finally disbanded in 1982. Now, fast forward to 1993, Elaine Brown wrote a memoir about her experience. It was called A Taste of Power. And that's when I met her. In just a moment, my conversation with Elaine Brown.
No, Sherman, this isn't the Wayback Machine, but it is a look back at an interview from the 30-year archive of national radio personality Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
So here now, from 1993, Elaine Brown.
I had to write this book. It was either write this book or still not settle with the fact that I was no longer in the Black Panther Party and not look at the trauma of having been in the Black Panther Party, which was affecting my daily life. So this book is somewhat therapeutic for me, though I did have my own other therapist, and also therefore healing, as therapy must do. It was a very traumatic 10 years in the Black Panther Party, which is like 50 years in real life or in other life. And I felt somewhat ashamed to be leaving the party, guilty to be alive and well, and floundered around for many years trying to live without really living, if you know what I mean, or if you can appreciate the meaning of that. So finally, and I went to law school, and I tried to get back into the swing of things or get a life. And I couldn't. And so ultimately, my friend suggested I write this book, and so I did.
Why did you feel the necessity to go back to the beginning, to your childhood, and take us, if you will, from day one?
Yes, almost from day one, don't I? I even mentioned the hospital I was born in at one point. Right. Well, because I thought that it was important to see the thread that how could one come to be the chairman of the Black Panther Party and be a woman on top of it? Who were these people, these Panthers? I mean, there's an image, of course, and that's all we have left of the Panther Party is an image, and that image is mostly some kind of a militant, sometimes anti-white, sometimes whatever, organization of crazy people running around with guns. So there was a need to, first of all, show where I came from, which is, my story is not unique. In many ways, it is not unique at all. It's so ordinary. People come up to me, including people who are not black or not women, and say, you know, I had an experience like that. I really did. And then all of a sudden you say, well, gee, it's not so strange that this woman became a Black Panther, because the threat of the Black Panther Party was actually much larger than people imagined. So I thought you had to see all the pieces that connected my emotional life and that shaped me culturally, socially, to understand how you could end up being in the Black Panther Party, and maybe to understand how there ended up being a Black Panther Party.
When you put it all down on paper in front of you for you to look at your own life on paper, did the path from your childhood to the Black Panther Party become clear? Did it look to you inevitable that you say, of course, I had to have gone this path?
And even, in fact, it did, but not right away. I mean, it was just as the different little pieces began to fall into place. I mean, people might in reading this, think it strange that the person who shaped my political consciousness was a white man. And here I ended up a Black Panther, and they may seem a contradiction in terms, but when you know the rest of my life, then you do know that it all makes sense. So when you take all the pieces out, then they may look strange, but when you put them all together, then they don't look strange. And when I looked at my life, I thought, oh, gee, of course. By knowing J. Kennedy, it was very easy for me to work with the group in Hollywood, for example. I mean, just a little thing like that. By being on the streets of North Philadelphia and being with all those gangbangers and finger poppers, it was really not that difficult for someone who, a woman like me, to work with all those brothers who were in the party who were also from the streets. So there are all these pieces that all made sense in terms of style and content.
What did the Black Panther Party say to you that was attractive? What made you feel a kinship with them?
Well, there was, first of all, I think maybe it was just the question of action and the ultimate solution concept. In other words, the idea that everyone at that time, I mean, this was a tremendous time in terms of, everyone in the Black community and in the white areas, and students and young people, everybody was protesting something, arguing something, questioning the culture, questioning the society. So the first thing to know is that the ambiance was there. I didn't invent all of this. I was just there. I stumbled into it. I was living in it. And the difference between the Black Panther Party and all the other movements, I mean, there was the anti-war movement. There were all kinds of protest movements. There were all kinds of cultural movements, all kinds of nationalist movements. But none of them were doing any more than talking about their positions. And the big difference between the Black Panther Party was that it actually intended and did begin to take some action. And that action was so incredible because the first part of the Panther program that was addressed was the repression of police. So you had people literally out on the street with guns saying, not shooting at police initially, although we got some people in the party who thought that was what the deal was. The deal was to defend. The deal was to ride the streets and protect the people who were there against the very forces that were supposed to protect them and to demonstrate that they had the right to do that. So here you had people who were not writing a paper about this, who were not telling everybody we have to stand up and what we have to do, but who were leading that with action. There was no way to look at that and speak the rhetoric of the 60s and not feel somewhat disingenuous without going forward. Going forward, however, meant, or it seemed to mean, a commitment of both a body and soul. But there was nothing else I could do once I discovered that there was a Black Panther Party. The other part of it, personally, was there was a style and feel and character of the Black Panther Party that was just personally appealing to me. It was urban streets. I came from those streets. And there was also a mixture of a kind of intellectual group who had these dynamic ideas, but not in the intellectual conversational way, but who had these dynamic ideas, and that appealed to me. And it was a revolutionary group, not a nationalist group. It was not it was in fact internationalist. We thought of ourselves as internationalists. And so that appealed to me because I couldn't imagine myself running around denouncing whitey, as it was said in those days. So that had nothing to do with me. And mostly those people who did that were middle class and very intellectual college campus students as opposed to people from the street. So all of those little things, it was sort of just my style, and it just sort of fit me perfectly, except for that little part about committing my life, and I had to get over that, which I did.
Did Huey Newton shape the Panthers, or did the Panthers shape Huey Newton, or was it a little of both?
Well, I don't think it was a little of both. I think that Huey Newton really created and invented the Black Panther Party as it was. It really reflected his persona. There were so many points at which he really wanted to leave the party once he realized that he had created the party. He hated the whole idea of being responsible for anybody. He was just really a rebellious person in his character, and also very much of an existentialist. So the idea of being regimented into this party really didn't appeal to him, and he was constantly resisting it, constantly very reluctant to be this leader. And it was quite by accident that he became the leader in that way, in such a grand and iconoclastic way. and that was due to the shooting of the police officer in Oakland, the killing of Officer Fry. And all of a sudden, he became Huey Newton, a poster, who was just a guy who said, let's do this thing today, and maybe there'll be this party, but now I have to administer this party. Everyone else followed suit. There was no way that you could say, how could you say that Huey Newton, who's been out with this gun, who's gotten shot by this cop, who's charged with killing this cop, who's the Free Huey movement is being created around him, how are you going to call yourself a man, or how are you going to call yourself a revolutionary unless you've gone this route? And so he began, through that one act and other things that he did, began to influence the style of the party. During his absence, however, a lot of the rhetoric of the party was invented by Eldridge Cleaver, which Huey eventually had to erase, both expel Eldridge and erase the rhetoric and change the rhetoric. But I would say that more than anything, Huey certainly shaped the Black Panther Party.
You referred to at one point in your book to him as something of a genius, but also with a madness that overtook that genius toward the end.
Yes, and destroyed it in many ways. Well, he was a genius in the sense that he could read every idea, and he could be creative with ideas about social conditions in the world. He created a theory, as I indicate in the book, called intercommunalism, which is a strange word, reactionary and revolutionary intercommunalism, as he called it. And we talk now about global economies, but Huey was writing this, and it's in our newspaper, so there's proof of it, about these global economies from a certain perspective that not many people had really taken. I could name someone who's taken a very similar position today, but I wouldn't want to get him in trouble relating his name to Huey Newton because he's well respected. But the point I'm making is that that's the kind of idea he would have. But that had to do with his own searching for some kind of meaning, this existentialist ontological search for some kind of meaning to life. And that the party was very much of an expression of that search. Needless to say, how could you search for anything if you want to be bogged down in this question about food and housing and clothing and poverty and racism and all this? So let's just get rid of this. The madness came because he didn't have the patience. His urgency to deal with these bigger questions was overwhelmed by this day-to-day detail. And then the other part was that he was a product of the streets of West Oakland, of an urban ghetto. And so he had even less patience, and his way of dealing with impatience was to fight. And it wasn't necessarily a manhood thing, because he really wasn't there per se. He was really a street person, in his style. So yes, he had a certain madness and a certain rage that he would direct wherever it affected him, depending on the moment. He was very unpredictable. And therefore, because it would depend on what was happening in his head as to how he saw someone approaching him. And so he was subject to doing just about anything. Lastly on this, I say in the book that he used to say things like, I will will myself to fly one day. And it occurred to me one day that Huey might really try to jump off that balcony and try to do that. And truly, without exaggeration, I could actually see him doing that in some larger sense in his life, except that he would also laugh, which is why he always talked about the laughing Buddha, and say, well, I think I probably will fall, so I'm not going to make this jump.
After this short break, Elaine Brown faces a question she's never been asked before.
Are you enjoying this conversation so far?
And would you like to get a copy of the book we're talking about?
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
When you make a purchase through our affiliate links, you're also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1993 conversation with Elaine Brown. Did you want to take over the party?
That's a very good question, and no one has ever asked me that, and I don't know that I've ever asked me that. No. I was very happy with Huey until he became completely crazy in the last month before he went into exile. I liked being the sort of backstage person. Plus, you get to hide, you see. One of the things about creating martyrs and heroes is you get to hide and put all that burden on them. You know, it's like, well, if this man doesn't do well, we're sorry, but I'm still here, but if he does well, I get to bask in the glory. I mean, we package up Martin Luther King and have, Martin Luther King Day. We package up Malcolm X now and so forth. And so I didn't necessarily, I was kind of a scary person, scared of a lot of things, as you see and as I write about. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't have occurred to me to take that ultimate step that to look up and find out there was nobody to say no to me. That was actually the taste of power. There was nobody who was going to tell me no at that moment when I took the reins of the party, which means there was nobody going to tell me you did a good job. I wasn't getting an A to an F. There was no more authority, but more importantly, there was no one to hold responsible other than myself. And that was the first time I realized that I was totally responsible for what I did and that what I did could be very dangerous. And it was an incredible feeling. So it wasn't something I was fascinated by it at the moment that it happened, by the possibilities that I could take these things and save this party and do all this wonderful stuff. On the other hand, I was terrified of the responsibility and the authority and power that I had over an entire organization, and I knew what that organization could do.
Well, you know what they say, that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you are in control, as you say, of all the guns and all the money,
that's right.
You had absolute power at that point.
At that moment. Over that party, but you have to know what that meant. This wasn't over the NACP, you know what I mean? This is over a group of people which was armed to the teeth. Certainly not as armed as the CIA or the FBI, much less the entire national government or the police forces. But it was armed. We were armed, and armed seriously. And we had enough money to do something with that. And we had enough programs and influence and so forth. And so there I sat, even though the party itself wasn't a big mass organization, but it was every single person there was committed. So every person we had in our party was worth about another 100 in any other organization. So here we had these few thousand people, but we had these thousands and thousands who were affected by our programs. And here I sat in this moment knowing that I could at any moment command just about anything to happen, and it would happen. It would get done. My will would be done.
It's quite a bit of power for a woman in 1974.
Even in 1993.
Did any thought, 20 years ago, did any thought occur to you that 20 years from then you'd be sitting in a radio studio out on a book tour describing these events in your life? How could you have foreseen, did you think 20 years ago you'd be alive in 20 years?
Well, in 1969 and 70, I definitely didn't think I would be alive in 20 years. I prepared my life to die. I mean, I did not prepare. We were doing things for our children with the idea that we would never see them grow up. Not because we were heroic, but because we really thought we were going to die. It was just a question of looking around for how can you live another day. So there was no long-range plan. So the idea of 20 years from now sort of didn't enter your mind. But once we began to really hunker down and talk about serious control of one city, the city of Oakland, and really imagine these long-range plans, then I did envision that I would be alive. And certainly I might have envisioned that I would write a book, not this book, of course, but a book. What it would have certainly been a political treatise or something like this. So from that perspective, because I was very much in the public eye in Oakland and very much involved in, a tremendous number of big projects there. And so it wouldn't have been inconsistent with my role then to imagine myself writing a book, but certainly not this book.
What is the Black Panthers' legacy? What is left to them besides a footnote in a history book?
Well, one of the things is we won't be a footnote with this book and the other books that are coming out. So now we will be at least a book. While my book is not about the Black Panther Party per se, it's certainly, I was there 10 years. There are not a lot of people that were there any longer than I was. And there are not a lot of people who are as involved and as deeply involved as I was. So there is a view from the top and from the inside that this book presents and creates a history and triggers the beginning of a literature. And while this is a personal, what we call a slave narrative, it's a personal narrative. On the other hand, it does have an historical value. But the other legacy of the party, other than our story, exists in concrete in this country. I mean, free clinics are everywhere. Every time you see a free clinic, know that this idea was not around before the Black Panther Party. Maybe the idea was around, but in our lifetimes, there was no availability of medicine in the neighborhood. We had ambulance services. I mean, we not only had ambulance services, we had medical vans that would go into the neighborhoods. At one point, just before I left, We had medical vans going into the neighborhood that would give a pap smear on the van. I don't even know if that's true today. Wow. But I know that because I know who ran that program. It was in Los Angeles. So, and we had, of course, the free breakfast programs and the free lunch programs. And sickle cell anemia as far as the medical programs. We had busing to prisons programs. We were talking about prisoners' rights for a long time ago. We now have lots of organizations supporting prisoners' rights and, trying to reform or change the prison institutions and so forth. I think that any of these social programs that you see that are very community-based, that are very ordinary programs, that are action programs in terms of not protesting the problem, but actually addressing the problem with a solution, at least even if it's only a temporary solution, came from that example of the Black Panther Party. So I feel very good. And the third thing we have left is our children, not only our personal children, my daughter and other children that have been Panther people's children, Panther members' children, but also the children that were in our breakfast programs. I can't tell you over the last couple of days how many children I've met who are now not children, 20-some years old, who are saying, I had breakfast over in the so-and-so chapter. Remember when you had that breakfast program? I went to your school. And now I've just gotten my master's degree in such and such. And most of them are very well-educated kids. And they have the thread from the Panther Party, and now they're also armed with an education. So I think there's a tremendous legacy because of the interest that I've seen in my book. And in this era, all of a sudden, everybody wants to know what did happen then. And I think that legacy is I'm very proud of that.
Elaine Brown will be 82 next week. She currently heads Oakland and the World Enterprises, an organization she founded. Now you can get your copy of A Taste of Power by Elaine Brown by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. HeardEverything.com is where you can also find my 1991 interview with Black Panther Party co-founder Bobby Seale.
My philosophy was not just black power. There was a all power to all the people philosophy, and I still exist and stand on the principles of being what I call a revolutionary humanist.
And my 1994 conversation with the lawyer who many times defended members of the Black Panther Party, William Kunstler.
Pickets around my house, bullets fly through the downstairs window, bullets in the mail, hate messages on my answering machine. If you're going to do these kind of cases, you got to anticipate and expect that and hope to live through it.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, the man who for decades was the historian of his Native American tribe, the Crow tribe of the northwestern part of the country, my 1993 conversation with the great Joe Medicine Crow.
People seem to think that Indians are stoic with a deadpan and just sit there and think about the good old days. But actually, they're humorous people. They're very humorous people.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.